And when you can push the boundaries of your own personal comfort zone just a little bit every single day, the wider that area becomes. And the things that you used to fear, the things that seemed uncomfortable, or the things that seemed almost seemingly impossible become a part of your everyday life. And that winning mindset of persistence and determination reminds me of a great quote by Martin Luther King Jr. that says, "If you can't fly, you run. And if you can't run, you walk. And if you can't walk, you crawl. But no matter what, you keep moving forward." In the SEAL teams, we have an ethos, a creed that embodies our culture and our values. And a similar line from that ethos says, "I will not quit. I persevere and thrive in adversity. And if knocked down, I will get back up every time. I am never out of the fight."
So speaking of your book, Embrace the Suck, I wanted to ask pain and suffering and its role in our growth. Can we be the best versions of ourselves without it?
I don't think that we can. I mean, obviously, there's one avenue to take when we look at this topic is that pain and suffering are inevitable. Adversity is inevitable, pitfalls, obstacles, things like that in our personal lives, of course, our professional lives and careers and goals that we try to pursue. There is no part of our existence, and of course, integrating the general basis of the human condition in there where we don't experience some degrees of pain and suffering, some more than others. Some to varying degrees than others, but also it does exist both personally and professionally. But as the old adage goes, it's really about how we learn to continue to evolve and adapt during times of pain, suffering, adversity, and how we can move more quickly from the general human emotions of discomfort, or all the way to to those varying degrees of stress and anxiety and fear more quickly into action-oriented execution. What can I learn from this existing situation? How can I apply that to my personal development, to personal growth? And then going as far, as, from Stoic philosophy to how do I make the obstacle, not just seeing it as in my way, but stealing from, borrowing from, Ryan Holiday is how do I make the obstacle the way? So obstacles are inevitable, but looking at them in a completely different way. So you're immediately looking at what you can extract from that experience to make it an immediate learning opportunity for growth.
For sure. Well, everyone who thinks of the Navy SEALs, I think almost everyone, they always think about Hell Week. It's just almost synonymous with the name. And I know it's only a tiny, tiny piece. But for those listening who don't know about it, like what Hell Week is, can you just explain that and what role it plays in the journey on becoming a SEAL?
Absolutely. I'll give you a little bit of context for the audience. It's, from, having grown up in Dallas, and I did my undergraduate education at Southern Methodist University, earning degrees in finance and economics, had no aspirations whatsoever of joining the military. Granted, this was just pre 9/11, so we were technically at peacetime, although I don't know if we're ever technically at peacetime, but no formal conflicts that we were involved in as of at that point. And it was actually one of my SMU friends, one of my fraternity brothers, actually, who I had become close friends with. He was a year behind me in school, but he was one of these young folks who had a more or less lifelong passion, a dream, a vision to graduate, join the Navy, and at least attempt to be accepted into the notorious SEAL training pipeline. Hopefully, with a little grace from God, being successful in that endeavor. Well, I thought that was very admirable, and I didn't know a lot about it at the time, other than some books that were available. But it wasn't yet something that I was even anywhere near considering. But when I graduated and I was working in finance, grinding out 80-hour weeks, and he was a senior, we actually did, carve in time, every single day, or at least 6 days a week to train together. For me, it was just a way to stay fit, have an accountability partner, and simultaneously help a close friend prepare for that arduous journey that laid before him. But by nature of that training regimen, we started spending a lot more one-on-one time together, having a lot of deep dialogue about the implications of this journey, the pain and suffering that would be inevitable along that journey. And of course, the risks associated with doing that. And I say risks, I mean, with upwards of an 80 to 90% failure rate per class, when you all said and done, from the applicants that try to the ones who arrive to the ones who actually graduate, the risk in that context obviously means you don't get to go home. You're still going to be serving the military. You're going to be serving the Navy in some capacity, maybe not in a capacity that you initially anticipated or had hoped for, but it's still a great opportunity to serve. But when I say risk, I mean, there's a high likelihood that individuals are not going to be successful in that pursuit, obviously. And so over time, I became a little more interested. It piqued my interest, obviously, from, general fascination about the history of naval special warfare. And I started reading more books and consuming more content and learning about essentially how we have built over the decades through conflict, through brutal training, brutal selection, through, even psychology and neuroscience, how we built one of the highest functioning organizations in the world. And that's just across all categories. Obviously, a little bit of a biased opinion there, but if you look at it from a high functioning standpoint, from a results orientation standpoint, Naval Special Warfare is one of the highest functioning organizations out there. So how do we do that? How do we achieve that? And of course, it goes back to any good organization looking at what are your talent acquisition strategies? What's your onboarding look like? And how are you going to train and develop and retain the best possible talent that you can to drive performance, to drive success, and drive desired outcomes? Hell Week is the 5th week of a very long, over a year-long training pipeline, obviously front-loaded because we want to, I don't want to use the term weed out, but for lack of a better phrase, we're weeding out those that aren't going to fit, at least at that time in their life, into the organization. So the first few weeks leading up to Hell Week are more or less just as brutal as Hell Week. You just get to go back to your dorm and sleep for a few hours a night. So you can lose, sometimes you can lose up to 60 to 70% of a class just in the first 4 weeks leading up to Hell Week. And then a lot of the class will enter Hell Week sick, injured, or both. So everybody's entering Hell Week at a good 50% performance status, at probably at that time, the hardest week of your entire life. And it's it's literally one of the most fascinating social experiments I think ever created on planet Earth. And so Hell Week begins on a Sunday evening and ends on a Friday afternoon, obviously for very few of the class and participants. And during Hell Week, you essentially don't sleep for the entire week. You run the equivalent of multiple marathons while wet and sandy inside and out. And by that, I mean the instructors ensure that the students get the sand on the inside of our clothing so that it wonderfully strips the flesh off your body as you run. And it's highly effective. In the civilian world, you might call this exfoliation. But of course, it's a few layers of skin too deep. Obviously, you swim dozens of miles in the open ocean. You run with logs, boats, backpacks. You've read the books, you've seen the movies and things like that. But it's constant motion, constant activity. And what's fascinating, though, and we can get into this more deeply, are the attributes of the students that are successful. Now, if you started on day one trying to analyze or identify the 30 or so students that are going to be standing tall at graduation, you'd be wrong every single time. You might get lucky. You might say, oh, that David Goggins guy, he looks like he's kind of mean and scary. He might graduate. And you might be right. But everything else, you would probably be wrong. It's not necessarily the big, menacing, muscle-bound, tattoo-covered guys that make it, or, the unassuming guys. A lot of times it's the people in the middle. But it comes down to these harder to identify attributes, obviously of natural degrees of grit, of resilience, the ability to maintain a positive mental attitude in the face of extreme adversity, one that sometimes surprises people, but a high degree of emotional intelligence, especially in the areas of self-awareness, social management. Obviously, that leads to a high degree of adaptability, but also social interactivity with the group, with your boat crew, with your class, because you cannot do this alone. It is designed to be impossible to achieve success as an individual purposefully. So you literally can't survive this training process, especially those first few weeks, especially Hell Week, as an individual. That's designed to be that way. But also, one thing, if you had to boil it down to one attribute, is that these students, this is not our research, but adapted from Carol Dweck's research in her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, looking at growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Every student that is successful has an authentic growth mindset that they develop, that they've cultivated over time. And it's not a destination, it's a journey. But they look at all these different categories, not intentionally, they just have this internally innate within them, but they look at obstacles, setbacks, constructive criticism, the success of others as fuel for their journey, as inspiration, as a learning opportunity to grow and develop, whereas fixed mindset people and teams see all of those as obstacles they cannot overcome. And therefore, my skills are my skills. There's no need to put extra effort into anything that I'm doing because I am who I am. I will achieve what I will based on that. And obstacles are setbacks. Obstacles will drive me to quit pursuing, goals and other dreams that I have set in my life. I see the success of others as detrimental as opposed to inspirational. And I take constructive criticism. My response is typically to be more defensive than to say, that's great feedback. I'm going to apply that to developing and growing. So those are just some of the elements that I think are good for people to understand why Hell Week is designed the way it is. From the outside looking in, it looks like a week-long torture session, but it is a science down to the way you spend every single minute designed to achieve our desired output is to start the foundation of building the best warriors in the world.
I definitely want to come back to growth mindset in just a little bit. But what I wanted to know is when you think of Hell Week, I mean, the amount of people that quit during Hell Week, it's the minority that finish, right? Did you ever have a moment in Hell Week where you were just thinking, I don't know that I can do this?
I never had a moment where, and I think that most friends that I've talked to and classmates and most folks who've gone through this that were successful never had a moment where they were close to ringing the bell, close to throwing in the towel, close to quitting. However, everybody more than once, if not maybe every 27 seconds, has a moment, especially in the early parts of Hell Week, where cognitively it's hard to even wrap your mind around the fact that you're going to be doing these horrific activities Sunday night until Friday, 24/7. So no sleep, no break, no mental shutdown, constantly. There is no light at the end of the tunnel, not even a glimmer. And that's very, very difficult for people to consider. It's a hard reality to digest. And therefore, oftentimes that's what drives students to be like, I can't even wrap my head around the fact that we're going to be doing this for this long. I'm out. And in that moment, they can't compartmentalize. They don't maintain that emotional connectivity to the mission, to the purpose, to why they're there in the first place, to why they've been considering this since they were in eighth grade, some of them. In those moments, they can't even see past their own pain, their own suffering, their own sorrow, whereas the growth mindset students are so excited to be there. They're honored just in the fact that God has given them this blessing to have this opportunity that they don't want to blow it. They don't want to blow. They don't want to let down the person to the left. They don't want to let down the person to their right. And the students who actually spend more of their time, more of their talent, and more of their energy looking out for other classmates more than they do themselves are the ones who are generally successful in completing Hell Week. And of course, ultimately the training pipeline and have successful careers in the special operations community because of that selflessness, that sacrifice, that willing to, bleed for your teammates. And you see that in the highest performing organizations in the world too, where there's a culture of humility, there's a culture of sacrifice, and ultimately a culture of servant leadership. Everybody is there to serve one another. And when you do that, though, you can look at it also from a psychology standpoint, and there's a selfish piece to that because the output of spending all my time and energy focusing on you as opposed to myself, well, I'm not sitting there thinking about how cold I am or how broken my body is or how much longer we have to do this evolution before we get a break, which we don't even get. I'm focusing on you and lifting you up and keeping you inspired, keeping you motivated. So I'm not thinking about myself. So there's a positive byproduct of being selfless that you benefit from, and the majority of people who are successful approach it with that mindset, whether they realize they're doing it or not. And that's one of the key drivers of success, I think, in overcoming, frankly, any adversity in life.
That reminds me of something Viktor Frankl said when he, survived the death camps in Auschwitz, and he noticed that the people who would also survive it were the ones who found purpose in something to help other people, or and his purpose was studying the whole thing, right? And then that gave them
Right.
that extra strength. And I'm reminded also of an early boss that I had. My first career was as a preacher, and I was deathly afraid to get up and speak in public. And one of the things that he had said to me is that you're so focused on yourself versus just thinking about how can I serve these people. And as I made that shift, it made a massive difference for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even when I kind of fell into the speaking side of what I do, it's a small piece, but it's good for our brand notoriety and thought leadership and frankly business development. But when I first started doing it, to your point, it actually came to fruition because of my Forbes call. I had a high-ranking executive globally from Bank of America reach out, sent me an email saying, "I love your philosophies here on kind of some of the things we're talking about, applying how we build culture and teams and leaders in special operations, and what can we extract from that, fundamentally, to build the highest functioning teams in organizations in the business world or any other type of non-military organization." And asked me to come speak, do some keynote presentations and breakout sessions and roundtable discussions at this global leadership summit in Hong Kong that was like 4 weeks away. Didn't even ask if I was a speaker, a consultant, or any of those things, which I was not. I was running a digital media and multi-channel analytics company. It couldn't be further removed from what he was asking me to do, but I'm an entrepreneur, so I was like, absolutely, I'll be there. Let's
For
set up some
sure.
calls to start planning, talking about content. But I was terrified to do it, and but I found a passion for it despite the fear. Kind of to your point about being a preacher. I mean, you're there to serve. But once I started transitioning my mindset to I'm there to serve, I'm there to inspire, to teach, to coach, it changes the whole trajectory of what that fear is because, like you said, it makes it not about you. It's about the mission and purpose of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I got to ask you this. So, David Goggins was on your boat crew. So, when you look back now, are you surprised in any way at the person that he is today? Like, was he that intense back then?
Let me tell you something about David Goggins. And I would say this if he was sitting right here. But let's just remember that David Goggins was not successful in his first attempt at Hell Week due to weakness, a lot of excuses, crying, and things like that. He was not successful in his second attempt at Hell Week due to other types of mental and emotional and physical weaknesses and a lot of, again, complaining and crying. And of course, I'm joking. Now, however, he did then end up in my boat group two, and then was successful. So, again, you guys do the math. Obviously, I take full credit for his success then and now, and hopefully, we'll cover the important aspect of humility and servant leadership in a moment. But no, he's a fascinating guy, obviously, and he is, I think what people love about him and what they connect mostly with him is despite his approach or, the words he uses, and sometimes he's presented himself in the past like, oh, I'm just a knuckle dragger and all this stuff, but he's not. He's a very smart individual. He's got a lot of wisdom in there, but he's also unapologetically himself. And I think that's what really connects people to him, whether they really share any type of personality or attribute traits with him, which most people probably don't, is because he's unapologetically who he is, and who he is an extreme high performer. Now, granted, if you study some of the highest performing people in the world, oftentimes, there might be a trail of destruction, in their wake. You see that a lot. I'm not saying that's, David's, situation or not, but when people and teams are so driven at results, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things obviously in their lives, personally and professionally, that will take a back seat, be eliminated, or be taken for granted. We all do this in pursuit of specific goals. That's why, again, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about balance. I'm writing a new book called All In, and we use that phrase in the SEAL teams. And David's very much all in all the time, but on very narrow and specific activities, paths, and goals. And that's very much around that philosophy. I'll get that question. People, well, you talked about being all in. How can I be all in on everything all the time? Obviously, the answer is you cannot, nor should you ever be. It is about very, very disciplined prioritization and relentless execution. I think that's why David's been successful in all the endeavors he's poured his heart and soul and passions into, because again, very narrow focus. And if you look at, a lot of the successful people, however you want to define success, but if you look at the most successful people, teams, organizations, they are focused largely on mastery of very few things. Again, we all know this generally as a philosophy of success, but at the same time, those who are really good and become masters at their trade, their craft, go deep and narrow in focusing on continually developing their skills, their trait, and their mindset to one or two things, not a multitude of things, but just one or two things. And I think that's why he's been so successful. And, as we age, we don't get less crazy, we get more crazy. So I think that's a wonderful thing to see David continue to blossom in his lunacy, but it's just seeing what he's accomplished. For example, someone who's owned a digital marketing and analytics company for 11 years, for example, seeing, I hate the term viral because viral is just a result of good content, but to see where he went, in the social media aspect of strategy, he's got a good team behind it. I've never seen anything like it, but it's a testament to, the content, the messaging, and oftentimes the timing of that message to see that level of explosive growth. And I can't go anywhere in the world now where people are like, oh, do you know David Goggins? I'm like, let's keep it about me, people. Come on, why can't this always
Yeah,
just
for
be about
sure,
me?
for sure. And to your point that you make in your book, a lot of this just comes back to values, right? What do you value? That's really how we're going to define success.
Yeah,
You can be successful in other areas, but if you don't value them, then are you really being successful? So everyone has to answer that for themselves.
right.
I wanted to, ask you, like in your book, you were talking about Stephen Kerr's simple performance formula, right? Ability times motivation equals performance.
Yep.
And, I love that model because it's simple, it's accurate. And the idea, if you've never heard of that, is that, ability times motivation equals performance. But let's say you're a manager and then you get promoted and now you're a VP. Well, now you might be doing things that you're not used to. And so maybe your ability is a bit lower. Even
Yep.
if you have the motivation, your performance is going to drop a bit. So therefore, we need to do some training, right? You need to get some skill acquisition. I wanted to, though, in the context of being a SEAL, you go through this intense training that's whatever, a year long. But then at some point, you're walking on the streets in Fallujah, Iraq. And I want to know, how big a gulf is that? Or does it seem vaguely familiar because you've trained and prepped so much for this?
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's a fascinating part of the journey as you go from well trained. It's interesting topic because you can be labeled from by training and from a brand perspective, if you will, as an organization as the best in the world at what you do. But if you have never, and again at the beginning of these conflicts, until we went downrange, none of us had ever experienced war. We had never experienced combat. We had never applied these tactics, strategies, and skills in a real world environment. So there's still going to be, you have a high degree of confidence, of course, because of the training and the organization you're a part of, and that's critically important. But at the same time, you're going to have a little voice in the back of your head saying, how do I hope this training applies? Because some of it will and some of it won't, because of the vast amount of time being more or less at peace and being trained by peacetime SEALs. You're going to be training with a skill set where some of those things may not still apply on what was then, the new modern battlefield, fighting a very decentralized enemy. And so therefore we had to, even in special operations, had to continue to become more decentralized as an organization, more adaptive, pushing leadership to the front lines, less red tape, moving at the speed that war requires. So some of those things, that sounds all inherent in special operations, but not necessarily. I mean, generally the US and other allied forces around the world entering these conflicts, we entered them, as a big, large, slow moving cruise ship, even at the special operations level, because again, it's all tied together from a vertical strategic standpoint. And it was quite fascinating. I talk about this in my first book, Taking Point, kind of similar in many ways to McChrystal's Team of Teams, looking at and studying essentially the organizational transformations that the military and the special operations community had to go through almost consistently as we adapted to the realities of war. And the longer you fight the same enemy, the more they adapt to your tactics and strategies. So it's a constant evolution, just like in modern business, obviously today. But going back to the mindset of, you've done all this training and then boom, you're on your first op, you're downrange, and you don't realize how well trained you are until you get into your first gunfight or your first conflict. And there's always lessons learned. It's not always perfect, and it can be messy, it can be violent and scary in ways. But again, one of the things that comes from that training is rapid learning, rapid adaptation. That's why debriefing, after action reviews are critically important. On that first O3 deployment, sometimes we're doing 5 or 6 target hits in a single night. Yet we never skipped the debrief. Even if it's a quick down and dirty debrief in the back of a pickup truck on the way to another target, or something, the next morning, a little bit more formal in a room with a PowerPoint presentation where we can really deeply analyze what went well, what didn't, actionable insights that we can apply to continuous improvement. That does, I think, give a team a sense of continued confidence, even if the op went sideways. You had casualties, didn't accomplish the mission. It's always, we don't dwell on those things for longer than is necessary to extract insights, apply the learning, and you move on. You don't want to forget about it. You don't say, well, that's in the past. Let's forget about it. You want to analyze, you want to extract insights and lessons learned, but then you're focusing on prepping for the next mission. So it's this continual evolution. I think it also helps alleviate, battle fatigue. It helps alleviate fear. It helps keep the team, joined at the hip when it comes to protecting one another and driving mission success, because it's always about the next thing, the next mission, and ultimately battlefield superiority.
Yeah, constant improvement. Do you remember your first op that you went on?
Oh yeah. Interestingly, our first op was it was like something out of a movie. We weren't even so our task unit from SEAL Team 5, we were the first SEALs deployed into Iraq. Now we had SEAL Team 3 doing some of the ops and maneuvering along the Off Peninsula, securing the gas oil platforms, just for administrative purposes, obviously. We won't get into that. But when it came to, and then a lot of the elements from Team 3 pushed north from the Off Peninsula towards Baghdad with the Marine Corps and other traditional elements. But then when it came time to start, running ops in Baghdad, that was where we came in. We turned over to Team 3 and started running capture kill missions in and around Baghdad, Ramadi, Fallujah, and some other areas. Our first op, though, was handed to us when we were not even in Iraq yet. We were still staged at Ali Salim Air Base in Kuwait. But intelligence had come down the pipeline that essentially, again, the storyline, the narrative is like something out of a James Bond movie, but retreating forces, Iraqi forces, some, other types of emerging forces were had taken over control of a large dam and hydroelectric power plant. They were going to destroy the dam, flood the area below, cause mass power and electrical outages, ultimately, generally, to slow the advance of American troops through that region. So, again, sounds like something out of a movie. Our mission was to fly in multiple Chinook helicopters in partnership with the Polish GROM, basically Poland's Tier 1 Special Operations Unit, basically their version of SEALs or Dev Group. And we worked and lived with them most of that entire deployment, even on this first op. So we loaded up in large Chinook helicopters. It was about I forget, 3 or 4 hour flight to this target. And the mission was to assault the target, capture the target, and hold the target for 2 to 3 days until conventional forces could arrive and relieve us. One of the interesting realities that we faced around that hurry up and wait philosophy in the military is we got stood down twice due to sandstorms. So it was like this radical emotional roller coaster of everybody never having been in combat, literally like walking out. We're in the helicopters, we're getting ready to lift off. First mission, big mission, high profile, and then mission gets tanked at the last minute. This happened 2 nights in a row.
Oh, man.
So you get rolled 24 hours, and we got rolled 24 hours again. The third night, we were given the green light and actually went and executed the mission. Ended up being successful, no casualties or anything like that. Had some injuries, but it was, those types of things are hard to forget. But also, there were a gazillion lessons learned down to where you position your gear, how and where we fast drove, where we put our radios, like all these things that happened on that op, just little stuff. But also those little things can become big problems if they continue to persist. So even from day one, op one, there were a lot of lessons learned that changed how people configured their gear, where they put their radios, how we enter targets. So, and that continued on day and night, for months and months on that first deployment and other deployments. But again, going back to continuous improvement, that's an art that is critical to performance.
For sure. And when we're talking about continuous improvement, I don't know if you find this in your work in the corporate world, but one of the things that we always run into is, a company will have us come in and then, hey, we're going to create all this training and learning for their different levels of managers. Right. But the thing we always fight with is the managers, I don't have time. Like, I don't have time for this, right? Because they're just so busy. And sometimes it's legitimately they are busy, but to get people to prioritize just continuous improvement. Even we'll say things like 7 minutes a day, like put in 7 minutes a day, which you would think that should be okay, but people struggle with that. And I don't think it's a time thing. I think it's just a priority thing, right?
It is. I mean, our organization, we're moving more quickly towards productizing everything we do and becoming a SaaS organization around performance management, employee engagement, and retention. But over the past 5 years, we've been a more traditional management consulting and talent development firm, working with medium to global enterprises, doing similar work to you guys. And yeah, that's always one of the biggest hurdles which is also what we're trying to address from a software standpoint, is managers saying, I don't have time. And therefore, you're not getting full buy-in when they're already entering, a learning and development opportunity, a program, formal or informal, and they're saying, I just really don't have time for this. Therefore, they're going to automatically deprioritize the things that maybe they're not, directly getting recognized or rewarded for. Maybe it's not visibly tied into their, how they're compensated. So when they're that busy and they have all these other accountabilities and all these other KPIs that they're being measured on, of course they're going to deprioritize these types of things. But it's not so much about time, as you know, and as you just said, it's about creating capacity and making the time to do these things, realizing that the more they engage in self-leadership, the more they engage in their own personal and professional development, and therefore, if I'm a leader of people within my team, I will create higher degrees of performance. I will retain top talent, and we will become more efficient through better skills, soft skills, but also through better tool usage, better accountability. You can have all the best tools in the world, but if you lack accountability and other elements of just basic leadership, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get crappy results, as you know. But with good leadership, good accountability, and constant development, as you know, not the quarterly check the box or, yeah, we signed a few of these people up for this e-learning course, cool. Those are just box checking activities. So people talk and say, yeah, we do learning and development. Changes nothing at all. But the highest performing organizations in the world invest consistently in these activities. They make these resources available daily, if necessary, for organizations, leaders, and managers to make some time. Like you said, 7 to 15 minutes a day can have a huge impact on your success, your ability to lead, the new things that you learn. Even if at some point a manager might be like, why am I even taking this module? Why am I learning this? Why is James telling me about this right now? But over time, those dots start to connect. Even if you're
100%.
making it crystal clear why they're connecting, they may not be paying attention. But over time, they'll realize even, oh, wow, yes, I realize, well, how that skill set plays a role here. I realize how this technique plays a role in this type of conversation, this type of decision-making mechanism. And then it starts to come together. And of course, you see higher degrees of performance. They retain, talent more readily. And then, of course, that drives their ability to create, great customer experiences, grow revenue on the sales side, or even internally. And then ultimately, these things, as you know, drive growth and profitability. It's a matter of also helping managers understand why, just like anything else, why they're doing this and why they need to understand the importance of doing it. You want them to be totally bought in. You want them to understand that they're going to gain personally from this. They're going to gain professionally from this. You got to give them the what's in it for me, as we all need. But at the same time, continuing to instill a level of accountability, discipline, and humility in the team, especially among people leaders, that it's not just about their development. Their development is critical, not for themselves, but for their ability to lead their team and for what they're going to give to their team and their growth, their development. So it all cascades down. And I think, again, it's about unfortunately, have to continually storytell and show progress, and reward, but show the importance of why they're doing this in the first place. What's in it for them, what's in it for their team, and how everybody's going to win together. And when you do that, and people start to see the light, they will reprioritize their schedule. They'll analyze their current routines. They'll realize where they're wasting a ton of time on activities they shouldn't even be involved in. Therefore, that gets into delegation and autonomy and other things. But using even the tools they have at their disposal. We see this all the time. We're like, well, we don't have the right tools. Like, no, you do actually. You're not even using them.
Yeah,
No
for
wonder you have
sure.
crappy data
For
and
sure.
inefficiencies. You're not even using the stuff we've given you. So sometimes it's even that, but doing that sort of regular audit of the tools that you have, your routines, your systems, your process, even at the individual level, how do I spend my time from the moment I wake up, hopefully early, to the end of my day? Is that very structured? Is it disciplined? Is it regimented? Do I have a good morning routine to ensure that I have so that I can show up every day for myself, my team, and the organization? All those things have to play a role, but typically all of us need some degree of constant reminder that it's important and we'll benefit from it, and others will benefit from it too.
For sure. That's why leadership's so important.
Yeah.
And like you said, Navy SEALs being one of the premier elite organizations in the world, and yet it's just all about constant improvement. So for sure, lots of lessons to learn there. I want to talk about team for a moment. Any of my ex-military friends will say the same thing, that what they miss most about being in the military is the camaraderie that they had. And so can you describe a little bit about the camaraderie, the bond that you shared with your fellow SEALs? And then also, kind of a follow-up to this, how can leaders create that today? Because obviously the corporate space isn't the military space, right? Somebody can just go, oh, I'm going to quit this. I'm going to quit this company and go to another one. So it's a different animal. But so it's kind of two
Yeah.
questions there.
Of course. I mean, that's, and you'll hear this, like you have heard this, it's the number one thing that we are nostalgic for, that we remember. You remember the positive aspects of that bond, in the SEAL teams, that brotherhood, that sisterhood, that, the camaraderie that you have that you literally cannot replicate in any other organization. There's elements to it that exist in all organizations, from a family unit to a business organization, a sports team to the military, but at that degree, because lives are literally on the line, and you're out there doing the nation's business. You can't replicate that, and that's something that you'll carry with you forever. Now, granted, obviously, there's a lot of things that you carry with you from those experiences that are a burden, but a burden that we all willingly carry. You go into it knowing that that's a burden you're going to have to carry, mentally, emotionally, and physically, for many people. But you don't know what magnitude, because it'll depend. But then when a lot of our brothers and sisters out there who are carrying that burden to a great degree of magnitude, and that's why we have such severe mental health issues that I think a lot of military organizations and the Special Operations Committee have gotten a lot better at addressing very proactively amongst our active duty members, because this is not a veterans problem. It's an active duty problem when you're at war for 20 years. And that was, it seems obvious and self-evident, but that's something that was a long cultural shift in key stakeholders and leaders in the military and special operations. Well, gosh, what if we start testing people for TBI and PTSD? What if they have it? What do we do? Well, they do have it. So let's get some data and let's start addressing the issue like you would do in any organization. We have engagement issues, we have retention issues, high turnover, low morale, shitty culture. Well, you have it. So get out there, be proactive, and address it. If you want to continue to claim to be one of the highest functioning organizations in the world, again, going back to continuous improvement, you got to get the good, bad, and the ugly out there, and address it head on. And I think we've done a very, very good job of that, and also distilling kind of that stigma of, well, we don't talk about that, or PTSD isn't a real thing. I actually heard people say that. And changing the narrative and changing the culture and the mindset of our active and our retired operators to get out there and know that it's your responsibility to get help for yourself. It's your responsibility to reach out to teammates are in a dark place. It's again, going back to what we learned, it's not about you. It's about your spouse, it's about your children, your community, the people around you that you're negatively impacting by not seeking help because of your ego, or you don't want to address it, or you don't think it's a tough guy thing to do. I think we've addressed that mindset quite significantly when it comes to the burden that you carry. But again, going back to your point around camaraderie, remembering that we can carry that together. And I think that also the culture has changed a lot, where you have veterans out there. Marcus Capone, a buddy of mine I went through training with, he and his wife guy was killing it at Merrill Lynch. He's like, no, this isn't fulfilling me. This is not my mission. And so he started a veterans nonprofit largely around the use of psychedelics to address traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And they spend time at the White House. They're all over the place. And again, it's kind of, how can we find ways to continue the mission? I think you see that a lot because of the camaraderie. Is operators and our military servicemen and women, many of them find ways to continue that mission, whether it's their day job or not, bringing a lot of that humility and selflessness and willingness to help others into their lives, in perpetuity, is a wonderful thing. And that's why when young folks come to me, well, I'm considering this, or I'm thinking about going to the Navy, or I want to be a SEAL, that's a lot of what we talk about is, making sure they understand the mission, the culture of the community, the expectations of the community, but also the positive benefits they'll have from a career in the military, but also the things that might be inevitable that they'll carry with them, but that they can also use for some type of positive output later on too.
I want to ask you a little bit about growth mindset. You brought that up earlier.
Yeah.
And one thing that we've noticed over the years is that, if I go back a few years in our company, we're teaching on a topic, accountability or leadership or engagement and all that stuff. But what I began to realize is that the foundation of all things, if you're going to be excellent, is a growth mindset. Because you can teach somebody, hey, you got to hold people accountable, and here's how you hold people accountable. But if you don't have a growth mindset culture, then accountability is just 10 times harder, right? You're always fighting that. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about that for you. Like, talk about the evolution of that in your life, because sometimes people have a very fixed mindset about growth mindset, like, oh, you either have growth mindset or you don't, but that's obviously not the truth. But let's go back in the evolution of your life. In your book, you talk about growing up in Texas and playing rugby, and there's a great story in there about you trying to take on a bully and that not going well. So again, get the book and read that story. It's hilarious. But again, back in the evolution, where did that start for you, do you think? Having a growth mindset?
It's a good question. I've actually spent some significant time reflecting on that because we remember things a little bit differently about our childhood and our youth and growing up and the experiences we had or the decisions that we made and how we evolved into who we are today. But I think I've always had a high degree of curiosity in its simplest form. I think that plays a role in developing a growth mindset. That's the beauty of it, because growth mindset people know that a growth mindset is something to be developed. It's just something people with a fixed mindset need to realize that they can develop a growth mindset. It is that simple. It just takes work and discipline. But I was always curious about things, like, curious about music. So a buddy of mine suggested, well, let's start a band. Why don't you learn how to play the drums? So I learned how to play the drums. Or, skateboarding. So I learned how to skateboard. So, or these other things like, the military, or I was a swimmer in high school. But then I was like, swimming, I need to play like a contact sport. So I walked onto the rugby team in college and ended up being captain for junior and senior year. I'm not saying that to gloat. I'm saying it's something I had never planned on. And so I think oftentimes too, and I never had thought of myself as a leader. I'd never thought of myself necessarily as a high performer, kind of an average performer, somebody who's curious and a high degree of willingness to learn, but never a lot of natural ability in any of those things. Something for me, I had to work very hard to become a good contributing member to the swim team. I had to work very, very hard, and I did, to become a good percussionist. I had to work very, very hard to learn a sport that I'd never played before and to become proficient at it, but also whether I realized it or not, developing some degree of leadership skills to where others elected me captain, which I was shocked by, literally shocked by. And so, but I also realized that I'm at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to leadership capability. So something I realized that now I have the burden of command, and based on my curiosity and I guess who I was evolving into as a young man, I had a high degree of desire to learn how to be an effective leader on the rugby field, off the rugby field, to build a good team culture. So I didn't really know fundamentally any of those principles at the time, but even in undergraduate business school, you're learning a little bit of those things, not much. But I started reading books about it, and then that's actually when I started reading books about the military and military history. My dad had always been a big military history enthusiast. And so that's where I started to evolve, in my leadership capability. And I guess that's where I started to develop a growth mindset. And if you don't have a growth mindset when you get to buds, you'll either get one or you'll or you'll get out. So it's again something if we choose to develop a growth mindset or it's forced upon us. At the end of the day, it's a good outcome.
For sure, for sure. When you, let me ask this about it. When you find yourself, if you find yourself ever slipping out of a growth mindset, because I know that happens to me,
Yeah.
when you find yourself slipping out, how do you catch yourself and get back in?
I think that we all go through periods of time, even, and I don't put myself in this category, but let's stick to kind of the theme around like high performing individuals or teams or people who always are striving for excellence. You're going to hit and organizations experience this too. You hit a plateau where you become comfortable. You've achieved certain degrees of success. Things are working. There's seemingly no threats on the horizon, yet there are always threats on the horizon if you're not paying attention. But I think, for me, this happened last year. I realized that I was relatively comfortable, but comfortable but uncomfortable. Someone asked me, it was earlier this year, like, are you fulfilled in what you're doing right now? And he caught me. He doesn't do anything like he's an attorney and an entrepreneur, but in a brief moment of hesitation, he was like, "What was that?" and and because I was like, yeah, and I've always been someone who strives for happiness, but constant dissatisfaction. I try to mean that in a healthy way, meaning you're always looking for new ways to level up personally, professionally, fitness and wellness standpoint. And last year for me, was not a great year. Business was okay, but we're still like 2022, we crushed it. Tripled revenue, 48% EBITDA, grew the team, happy clients. 2023, then people are like, are we in a recession? Are we not? What's happening? People are cutting budgets, especially for things like management consulting, talent development, things like that. We did okay, but we did not, hit our projections. And so that was stressful. And then, that growing stress, and full transparency, I was drinking too much, and studies show that's not a great way also to cope with PTSD or traumatic brain injury. Who knew? Nor is it a way to cope with stress, apparently. And then my dad passed away suddenly in September, out of the blue.
Oh,
So,
I'm sorry.
as a man of faith, you'll see the interesting elements of this story. I was in Dallas visiting, with one of our clients for a couple of days. Some of our team members were there, part of an ongoing program, but they've been with us for years. So I'm there often with them, built a great relationship with their CEO. And it was one of those in and out trips. I'm in Dallas a lot. We have a lot of clients there. So it was one of those times I hadn't even mentioned to my parents that I was going to be in town because I was super packed schedule, in and out. And my phone started buzzing. It was around 4 o'clock, 4:30, kind of coming to the end of one of the days with this cohort we were working with, just constantly buzzing in my pocket. I thought I was on some lame, annoying text string with some college buddies or something like that. Inappropriate comments about this, God knows what. And it was my mom, and she said that my dad had a bad fall. He had been dealing with some significant heart issue. Very healthy guy, like, still working at 79, almost 80 years old, as a real estate developer, real estate finance guy. Works out every day, but he had, as we know, some of these things, your heart, your brain, doesn't matter how fit you are, if that's inherently or genetically part of your makeup. But he had taken a bad fall. I think he had overexerted himself, not surprisingly. And because of his um, because of the medication he was on, those blood thinners, it caused a brain bleed that was inoperable. So raced to the
Mm.
hospital, and he passed away at 11 a.m. the following day. The CEO of this big company drove me to the hospital. We were in Frisco, all the way to Presbyterian Hospital, which is a good
Wow.
45 minutes at best in rush hour traffic. He's like, let's go. We hopped in his Corvette. He's a lover of fast cars, and magically maneuvered through Dallas rush hour traffic to get me to the hospital. So again, the silver lining is, by the grace of God, I just happened to be there. I do not believe in coincidences in this regard. And I think God put me there in that moment to be able to spend those last hours from that afternoon
Hmm.
to the
Wow.
next day at 11 o'clock. Didn't leave his side the entire time. And then with loss, and I've experienced a ton of loss, obviously, with
Hmm.
teammates and things
Yeah.
like that, but never close family. We're definitely not a parent at that time. And so I had kind of an epiphany. I mean, these types of events help us question our own mortality, help us analyze our current priorities and where we
Hmm.
should be spending our time, where we shouldn't be spending our time. And one of the things I decided to do was that I knew was an obstacle anyway, regardless of what you tell yourself, the lies you tell yourself about being a high performer, was to eliminate alcohol from my life, is to go all in on full sobriety. Not for a month or a dry January, forever. I hadn't told my
Right.
wife
Right.
about this plan. She's like, "What? Where did this come from?" And that was eight months ago.
Wow. Good
And
for
I'll
you.
tell you, it has been, and again, this goes into the context of the question that you asked. It has been, for me, and again, I don't preach this to others, but for me, it's been an absolute game changer. I did and do have some very close male friends who are wildly successful in their entrepreneurial careers. They have great marriages, great families, they're great parents. who have also made that same decision. Some of them special operators, some of them, just great entrepreneurs and business leaders. Basically, men that I deeply respect that had made the same decision, not because they had some crazy problem with it necessarily. It's just, again, that's kind of an old adage about alcoholism and things like that, but just because they're like, this serves me in no positive way. It's I'm putting poison into my body. I'm just going to stop because I want to be healthy and I want to do really, really awesome stuff. And so they just stopped. No courses, no AA, just stopped. And so that's what I did. And it was one of the best and easiest decisions I ever made. And since then, it's been this incredible trajectory. My marriage is in the best place it's ever been. I'm emotionally, physically, yes, but obviously emotionally and cognitively present with my children. The clarity on the vision of where to take our organization is so clear now. We're going full transformation from management consulting to full SaaS in 6 months. We're raising money successfully. My morning routine is better. My workouts are better. Everything elevated by removing one obstacle. And again, whether it's that or other obstacles that we have in our lives, personally, professionally, and this is largely what the new book is about going all in, is you can't start down that path. You can't go all in unless you narrow your focus, spend time with only the right people, eliminate bad habits, unhealthy habits, and focus on your relationships, focus on doing good work, and focus on, quite frankly, leaving the world a better place than you found it. Those three things can kind of make you unstoppable as a person who is really ultimately trying to improve the lives of other people, the people around you, as opposed to, I want to go achieve this or I want to make more money. When it's not about that, those things typically follow. So,
Well, that's fantastic. And I'm not sure if you read President Bush's book that he wrote after his presidency. And, a lot of presidents will write this chronological thing. He decided to organize his book by decisions that he made.
yeah,
And
I
if
haven't
you
read the whole thing, but I've read snippets of it for sure. Yeah.
yeah, like the very first decision, which he said was the most important, was a decision to stop drinking. He said he never would have become president had it not been for that. So, no, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that and sharing that about your dad. And I'm so glad that you were able to be there with him. Uh, about parents, when we think about like our formative years are so important for what happens later. What did your parents do that now you're like, I'm going to do this with my kids that you're passing
Yeah.
on?
Yeah, I do think about that a lot. The stuff I think they could have done better, the stuff that I know they did a great job of. And I was talking about this with some friends last week. We were at their place up in Jackson Hole, and we were talking about parenting and what we've learned from we're talking about this exact topic actually, and realizing that sometimes we don't take a tactical pause or a moment to realize that in large part of what I've achieved to date is definitely inherent with how I was raised. I mean, that's just fundamentally a truth in psychology is that, the people who have the greatest impact on us in those early developmental years typically are parents or other some kind of close
Hmm.
guardians, positively or negatively have a great degree of impact on who we become as people. Now, interestingly, you see people who, and that's the fascinating part of a lot of research I've done around resilience and a growth mindset. You could grow up like David Goggins in a physically and emotionally abusive household and dealing with childhood obesity and learning disorders and racism, or you can kind of grow up in a normal household, like not normal, but a household that didn't have those things, but still have very similar degrees of resilience. Because some of those things are interestingly by choice. But I think if I had to bucket it into two or three things that I think my parents did really well is one, they worked their tails off. My dad worked his butt off. My dad was brilliant at being a workaholic, yet somehow always being present. I'm not sure how he did it. Like he was a workaholic, yet he was always coaching soccer, coaching swimming, or he might be in a suit, but he was at practice, he was at the events, and then same thing with my mom. She didn't work like that, but that was a really a cool balance that I want to emulate as a parent. And I just naturally, I don't like the term workaholic, but I work hard and I don't know how to do anything other than work hard, but not sacrificing the work for the values that I want to instill, for our family unit, for my marriage, for my children. So those things can't take a backseat, to what you're trying to do over here professionally. And there's got to be a good balance and a good blend of those things. These days, they're very much integrated. There's not really work-life balance. It's how you integrate those things in a connected way that's positive for everybody involved. And so that's one big takeaway. The others is they were really good at providing us the opportunities, never pushing things on us, but providing us the opportunities to learn new things, to develop new skills. Obviously, as we know, as parents, some things hit, some things don't. Eventually, our
Mm-hmm.
children will find their way. I've got 4 kids. You know, I do things a very similar way, but yet all 4 of them are vastly different people with vastly different interests. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, for
And we
sure.
got kids from 18, 10, 8, and 3. So I've got this whole spectrum of, I'm a 3-year-old. Yeah, I'm going to be going to youth sporting events for like the rest of my life. They're going to think it's like his grandpa. It's no, that's my dad. Um, and so that's another thing too. It's just exposing, not pushing, but exposing kids to that. And then I think it was an unspoken thing. I grew up in a very sort of formal Texas, we don't talk about real stuff type of household, but there was an underlying sense of love, of values, of going to church and things like that. We approach it in a little bit more of a California way now. My wife, they talk about everything. It's a little overwhelming. A little culture shock when a Texas family comes together with a Southern California family. It's just everything's out in the open.
I'm
But
sure.
that's not something I grew up with. There's things about that I respect and have to a degree carried over. But again, other elements that I realized that there's sometimes new, different, or better ways to approach building values-based environment within your family, and some of that is a little bit more transparency than I grew up with. So some of the things that I also look at is like, what could we have done better? What could my parents have done better? And I think, and again, it goes into how they were raised and all that stuff, but um, that's one thing that I think they did pretty good, but that my wife and I have taken a different approach, is to a little bit greater degree of transparency, openness, setting expectations, but understanding that there's learning moments to be involved in there, where I grew up in a very like zero tolerance on this, zero tolerance on that. This is the way it's going to be. And of course, I still did whatever the hell I want,
For sure, for
sneakily
sure.
in a black ops, special operations type of way. But I
That
think
was
that
your,
there's different ways to approach that. So,
that was your training. Well, listen, I could ask you 1,000 more questions, but I don't want to keep you here all day as much as I'd like to. But I'll ask you two last quick questions. Number
yeah.
one, what's your morning routine look like right now?
So right now, my morning routine is I get up religiously at 5 o'clock, so 5 a.m. And I've broken it down into basically, and it's something I kind of adapted and learned from Robin Sharma's book, 5 a.m. Club, where it's the 20-20-20 rule. It's not always perfect, nor should it be, and you should adapt it to your own, personality and
Hmm.
what you're trying to accomplish with a morning routine. But morning routine should be designed very, very purposefully. Otherwise, I ask this sometimes in group settings or with our client groups and cohorts of leaders, and they'll be like, yeah, I get up early, I start checking email, I start doing. I'm like, whoa. That's not the point of the morning routine. So I get up at 5. I know it's a cliche, but you don't have to post it on Instagram every time you do it. But I start with a cold plunge, and then some prayer and meditation. Then I spend another 20 minutes or so reading whatever book I'm reading at the time. Again, not a thriller novel at that morning routine. It's something purposeful that I'm learning about.
Hmm.
And then I spend the next 20 or 30 minutes right now, I spend writing. So that's because I need to make the time to write the new book before the day explodes into
Yeah.
chaos. But also, it's a very cathartic and creative process, of course, from sort of the more physical wellness activities blended then into prayer and meditation, and blended into reading, and then doing some creative work around writing. All of which, though, is designed for how I'm going to show up when I step onto the battlefield that day. Every day. This is an everyday thing, not 5 days a week. This is 7 days a week, no matter where I am. If I don't have a cold plunge, I'll take a cold shower. If I'm in a hotel, I'll still do the same routine. It's obviously you have to adapt it, certain degrees if you're getting on a 6 a.m. flight. But traditionally, people have pretty regimented morning routines. They have a couple different versions of that routine, so that they can do it. But it's not a 4 or 5 day a week thing. It's a 7 day a week thing. And it kind of goes into that uh, that Jocko philosophy of discipline equals freedom. And it's really, and again, this isn't something that's just part of like modern psychology. I mean, monks have been doing this type of thing for centuries.
For sure. For sure.
And Stoics have talked about it. And, all the Marcus Aureliuses of the world had morning routines. So it's not something new. People have socialized it through social media, but there's a reason people believe, in all seriousness, there's a reason people believe that your morning routine can ultimately really, when well designed, transform your entire life.
Absolutely. John Maxwell told me, he said, I write every day. And he said, what about when I'm sick? I write. What about when it's vacation? I write. He said, what about Christmas Day? I write.
Yeah.
And that's why he has 100 books and I have one. So last question for you is who inspires you right now? Who's inspiring you?
It's an interesting question. My general answer to the question is my teammates that I've served with. People always say, who's your hero? Who are your heroes? My team, it's the teammates of mine that paid the ultimate sacrifice. Those are my heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if I had to pick somebody, a person or persons who are inspiring me because of this radical transition of our organization from traditional management consulting to full SaaS over the next 6-12 months. We're in the midst of it now, but so over the next 6-12 months, we're almost done with our pre-seed capital raise right now. I'm going somewhere with this, don't worry, into our seed raise is that I'm again, I believe in a flywheel effect. I'm studying this right now. I'm writing about it in the new book, but also what it's about is about identity transformation in a purposeful, healthy way. Again,
Mm-hmm.
going to not drinking, really regimenting my morning routine, changing the morning routine, making it more specific, more purposeful. But also because I'm now going to be the CEO and leader of a SaaS company, a technology company, which both of my previous companies were tech focused, but not SaaS. It's different.
Yep, for sure.
Is so now I spend all of my time professionally and even personally with my friends that either are or have run, built, and exited software companies. So learning from them, getting inspired by them, asking them questions, people on my advisory board, some people here locally. We've had a big influx in Rancho Santa Fe post-COVID of, Bay Area tech folks, tech entrepreneurs. And people are over San Francisco. Nobody wants to live there anymore for some reason, and they all moved down here. And so some of those people who I've found real inspiration in is learning about their entrepreneurial journeys and the ups and the downs. And one right now is a friend of mine, Zeb Evans. He's the CEO of ClickUp, one of these rare unicorn companies. He's a good Christian boy from North Carolina who decided to move to Silicon Valley and make it big. Well, yeah, a lot of people say that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
for
he was one
sure.
of these people who's brilliant. He's eccentric. He's unapologetically who he is, not in a David Goggins way, but in a different kind of way. And he garnered attention from a bunch of VCs in Silicon Valley. They invited him in. All of them said no, and then he randomly came across an interaction with a friend of mine, David Sachs, who one of the PayPal mafia, runs Craft Ventures, big Bay Area tech guy. Our wives grew up together. That's how I know him. But in a sort of random encounter, you probably experienced this many times throughout your life. The random encounter
Yeah.
was the one connectivity that launched him to the stratosphere. Dave was like, I love your philosophies on all this, on life and politics. Wrote him a term sheet after an hour-long casual conversation. No pitch, nothing formal. And they've gone from zero to a $4.3 billion valuation in less than 5 years. But hearing
Wow.
his journey, he again, the same thing. He's 34 years old, he's single. Although I do think we just set him up with his future wife, but that's a different story. But he, again, we read the same books. He has a very regimented morning routine. He believes in reading philosophy. Not that we're preaching this, but he's Christian and he's extremely disciplined, so it's not just he got lucky or it was the right market fit, right product market fit at the right time. It's relentless work. But with good balance. And he's evolved and he's evolving into becoming a great leader of himself, of other people. We have 1,400 employees now, so that's something he's really trying to work on. So that's just one example, but I love stories like that because it's a story, we don't often hear the stories behind the unicorn companies or the star Olympians or the goats of their given trade in the sports field. You don't hear because we just don't have access necessarily to the information, the podcasts and stuff we do now, but you don't get to hear personally what that journey really was like. And it was grinding, it was soul sucking, it was pain, suffering, like we
Yeah,
talked about at
yeah.
the beginning. And then the notoriety comes much later on, even after a company or a business or a venture achieves some level of visible success overnight. Well, it wasn't overnight. It was a decade of grueling work that ultimately led to what it is now. So stuff like that. I love stories like that and meeting new people because I've spent a lot of time interacting with people from the military, but non-military people who have a very similar, if not the same amount of tenacity that have done just amazing things. And also they make it about other people. They want to change the world in a positive way, not be a billionaire for the sake of being a billionaire.
Yeah.
They want to change the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, you have inspired me, and I wanted to thank you for that. I'm so glad that I ran across your book. Like I said, I enjoyed it for many reasons, but just even this conversation has been great. I appreciate your authenticity and your humility, and I wish you all the best with the new company or the SaaS project that you're doing. And I'm going to say this about you. What I love about you is that not only what you did for the country, but that you're using your life, your wisdom, your experiences, even your suffering, to be a blessing to others, so that they can be strengthened, right? So they can find hope. And I think that's one of the highest callings we can have in our life. I think that's when we do this, I think that's when God smiles down on us, because we are using the greatest gift we have, which is our life, to inspire and serve those around us. And as you said, make the world a better place. I think you're doing that. So anyways, really been an honor to have this conversation with you, Brent, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Well said. Amen to that, brother. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversation and hope to do it again sometime.
Fantastic. We will. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Brent Gleeson. And like I said in the episode about his book, Embrace the Suck, it's really worth a read. And so I encourage you to pick that up. There'll be links to that in the show notes. It's funny. It's practical. There's a lot of great frameworks and models in there to help you live your life, lead, run a business, whatever it might be. So anyways, thanks for joining us. And also, I just want to thank you for coming to this episode of Born to Climb. And if you found this conversation helpful, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And remember, the path to greatness is a climb. It's one that takes perseverance, and it takes not giving up, but it's worth it. So until next time, I'm James Robbins. Keep climbing.